Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we're joined by two guests who've been on the show a good few times now, but they always have something to say. And I'm not saying that it's interesting, I'm not saying that it's going to make a difference to your life, but they've definitely got something to say. And those two people are Zac Braddy and Jamie Taylor. Jamee's been on a lot and reasonably recently, and it's been a little while since Zac came on, and I think he talked to us last about React. Or no, I think there was actually an episode before, since that as well. But we're here to talk today about what developers really want to achieve, sort of career goals and things like that. We often see really outlandish claims online from people, from developers, saying they're going to build the next Facebook, or they're going to build the eBay killer, or they're building a self-driving car in their garage. But we rarely see any actual results from these people. So I wanted to have an honest chat with a couple of developers that I respect and I trust, and I'll get them to talk about their realistic targets and that for the year. But sadly, there weren't any available. So Jamie and Zac have stepped in at the last minute. So thank you both.
I mean, should I leave or?
Well, I normally just do one or two guests. So yeah, if you go, it'd be the same sort of format as normal. So seriously though, thank you for coming on it and talking to us about this. And for those of you out there in listener land that don't know who these two guys are, I'm going to get them to introduce themselves. So Zac, if you could introduce yourself.
My name's Zac Braddy. I am a lead developer at a company called Kudu that is, in a sentence, trying to save people money on their mortgages. We're a small startup, and I'm a full stack JavaScript developer there. I'd say I'm a lead developer and a budding architect. I'm trying my hand at building something that's going to be able to scale as much as I can, and I'm learning a lot. So that's a lot of fun. Outside of work, Jamie and James and I all met in the Coding Blocks Slack many moons ago now. They must be coming on 4 or 5 years ago now,
something like that.
And so we all got our start making content for the internet around the same time. My addition to the internet was the reactionary. I first started doing React content, front end based content, and I've since let that sort of fade away. And now I make all sorts of content. I do soft skills content, and as well as different little bits of tech that I find interesting and want to share my knowledge on. So yeah, that's me.
Sure. And how about you, Jamie? You give some examples of what you do.
Yeah, so I've got it all written down here, actually. So I'm a .NET Core developer, and I always like to focus on the server-side stuff because client-side stuff is way too complex for me. There's like 12 bajillion different browsers, and they all implement different standards of JavaScript and CSS, so I'd rather focus on the bits that make sense to me. So, I tend to focus on server-side stuff. I tend to also look at like security of stuff, so how can, not in the high level Troy Hunt and penetration test sort of security aspects of stuff, but like, okay, so why have you done it this way? What's secure? What's not secure about it? I'm also pushing more into sort of DevOpsy things, although DevOps isn't really a title. It's just it's a collection of things that you can do, but that's an argument for another time. But yeah, like Zac said, us three, we met on the Coding Blocks Slack along with Paul Seal from codeshare.co.uk, and we've all done hackathons together and stuff, and we all get on that. So why not do something together, right?
Yeah, and what I liked about the format for this show is it's slightly different to what we normally do. It's a little bit less formal, but we are three developers that share similar experiences, similar opinions, but we also have very different opinions as well. And we also are coming at development from very different angles. So Jamie talked about being more of a server-side back-end, if you want, developer. Zack is a JavaScript developer, which at one point in time that meant that you did a bit of validation and some CSS animation through JavaScript, but now that can mean back end, front end, and everything in between. And myself, jack of all trades, master of none sort of thing. Do a bit of front end, bit of back end, bit of database, or all that sort of stuff. So we talk about goals and things that we want to achieve maybe in the next 12 months or so. So I think they're probably going to be very different for each of us. And as I've already said, people often come up with outlandish claims about what they want to achieve. And I think that people often set goals too high, or they set too many of them, and they never achieve them. Now I've got a list as long as my arm of things that I want to learn, and like Python's been on that list for probably 10 years. I remember Scott Hanselman talking on one of his episodes of Hansel Minutes about a book about learning Python that was designed for kids, and he said it was really, really good for anybody to pick it up because it was really nice plain English, and it gave everybody the introduction to it, and it was very clear. I bought that book, and that's about as far as it went. It's still sat on my site to this day, and it's so out of date. It's probably pointless me picking that up to learn Python with. And I'm not going to say that I didn't have the time to learn Python. I just haven't had the need to learn it. So that's why I haven't picked it up. And over that 10-year period, I've picked up a lot of other tech and other skills and stuff like that along the way. There's a quote that I'm probably going to butcher and misquote, which is, if there's a big enough need or want, you will find the time to do that something. And I think it's important to learn new things now and again. But I wondered, what you guys thought about actually learning new stuff, because we're all busy and we all have aspirations and goals. But do you think it's really important to pick it up for developers to be out there and getting maybe out of their comfort zone and learn something new?
It's absolutely important for you to get out of your own box of development for many reasons, but not least of which is the fact that learning something new allows you to be able to think about the things that you do know in a different way. It allows you to be able to solve problems that you may not have otherwise been able to solve, not just because you've got a new tool, but because you've got a new outlook. So there's a book that my boss has bought for our library of books at work, and it was. You may have to Google this afterwards and put it in the show notes. It's 7 languages in. Is it 7 languages in 7 days? Anyway, the point is the book teaches you at a very high level 7 different languages and the ways in which they're cool and the things that they can do and the things that they can't do. And the idea is that it is exactly what I've just been talking about. It's designed to take you out of your comfort zone. It's designed to allow you to then return back to what you do feel comfortable with and be able to solve different problems.
I agree with Zac. You can even do it with stuff outside of tech, right? So really bad example, and I'm usually good with examples. I usually use them all the time. But I said earlier on, I'm not a front end developer, right? I'm also not a WordPress developer, but I went and learned WordPress enough to give a talk on it to WordPress developers. Really, it was so that I could teach them about Docker, but I went and learned it enough so I can go and teach it. And now although I don't know anything about PHP, I've got an understanding of how that works, which then helps me to understand why the decisions were made to build it that way and why most CMS technologies work in a kind of similar way. And it helps me to understand how templating and components work in front end and stuff. So yeah, totally agree with Zac. Absolutely.
Yeah,
and it's important. Sorry, it's important to also do that for the reason that when we're not all building in ASP Classic anymore, right? Things are going to change, and different paradigms are going to come through. And what learning different things outside of your comfort zone helps you to be able to do is learn things outside of your comfort zone. And so, that is a skill that needs practicing, just like, learning your primary language. That is something you need to practice. Well, learning things in general is something you need to practice as well. You don't just be good at that straight away. And so when the paradigm shifts, when the industry moves on to the next new hotness, then you're going to want to be the most practiced in the industry at learning that new thing, so that you can get ahead and be a good person in the industry, right?
Yeah, there's a book that I read, maybe not last year, year before, and we've already done a show on it around a similar topic, which was about purposeful practice, and I think that plays into that definitely. And one of the points that you both made there is learning something new to take you out of your comfort zone, to make you reflect back on what you currently do, and maybe it makes you a better developer at what you're currently doing. So one technology I wanted to pick up this year was F sharp. It's a language in .NET for those of you that don't know, but it's a functional programming language, unlike C sharp and VB.NET. Although I think C sharp has some functional aspects to it, or pseudo functional aspects to it now. And what the reason for learning it is, I had no other practical reason apart from the fact that it would give me another paradigm to think about the same technology stack. And from what I've read and been told by other developers that went out and learned it, it changed their view on how they write their C sharp, and that they started writing it more like you get told you should be writing it, with immutable objects and things like that, so that your code is more concise, and when things go wrong, you can actually pinpoint when they went wrong and pick up from before they went wrong, and stuff like that. So that's what I wanted to get out of that. But due to other things that have come along and things I've needed to pick up out of necessity, that's probably going to be pushed back to maybe the start of next year, because I've got a few technologies and things that I want to pick up, because I need to for client work, for my own work, and stuff like that as well. Do you go on?
I found that learning functional really helped me, not only like for the reasons that you said about like state management as well, but it also helped me with being able to make sure that I kept my code clean and concise. I found that I really, really like a good compose statement, a really good compose function. For anyone outside of the functional area, what a compose does is it takes a whole heap of functions, and then it will take a starting parameter and it'll pass it to the first function, and then it'll take the result of that, pass it on to the next function, and then on and on it goes. So it's sort of like a reduce, but not the same purpose. The idea is basically just run it through all the different functions. And in that way, I found that I started writing a lot of composes where it was like, here's a function that does something very clean and concise, and then the next step is to do this other really clean and concise thing. And it broke my code down into exactly what you're talking about, where it's supposed to be, like the way it's supposed to be written. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And if you wanted to dip your toe into functional programming and you didn't want to have to pick up like a huge paradigm, I know that you're doing work at the moment in front end stuff, in JavaScript stuff. You could think about trying to use the library called Ramda, and it basically has very similar functions as underscore, but Lodash, sorry.
Yeah.
But it's very, very functional based, and so you can play around with it without having to worry about types and all that kind of stuff, and just understand the core concepts, and then maybe use that to be able to accelerate your learning into F sharp.
Yeah, not have to pick up and learn what monads are.
Are you allowed to say that? Do you have to bleep that, or?
I'm not sure. I definitely said monads and not monads. Yeah.
Monads is one of those things where, so on one of the podcasts that I create, the .NET Core podcast. I actually it's not out yet as of the time of recording. Interviewed someone about functional programming in in F sharp, sorry. And I said, "So what is a monad?" And we went on a 25-minute journey, and I still don't know what a monad is.
Yeah, yeah. I think I've done that with a couple of different technologies that are like, oh yeah, this sounds good, and then I'll speak to somebody and they'll explain it for an hour, and I go, I have no idea what that technology still is. So I talked about setting myself the goal of F sharp, which I've had to move there. Have you guys set yourselves any goals for the next 12 months or so, or even more longer term than that, I guess?
So for me, you see, my thing with setting goals, right, is you talked earlier on about sometimes you can set the goals too high, right? I'm going to build the next PayPal. I'm going to build the next Tesla. I'm going to build the next rocket or whatever. But I've also found that you can set your goals too low. So, like, somebody can go, yeah, I'm going to learn how to do this in this language. And it's like, okay, that's cool. Now you've done that. What are you going to do with it? Nothing. I'm just going to learn it because I'm going to learn it and I'm not going to do anything with it. Whereas with me, one of the things that I'm moving towards is making the web apps that I do create as small as possible, but still keeping the code really readable. So it kind of lends into that idea that Zac was talking about with the clean code. This function calls that function, calls that function, and you can do that in a non-functional way. You just have to have really clean code, right? But in order to do that, I want to try and learn as much about Hugo and Jekyll and Gatsby and all of these static site generators as much as I can, even down to like how it's actually implemented, not just, oh, this is how I create a website or whatever. Because I've got a few statically generated websites that are running on Hugo and Jekyll and stuff like that. And I've just kind of gone, right, I'll grab that theme and just throw it in there, throw my content on. And yay, I've created it, but I don't understand how it works. So one of my, I guess, medium-term goals is to take one of those websites that I've built and strip it down to absolutely nothing and then rebuild it all back up manually, create my own theme, create my own server-side components, create my own client-side components, create a bunch of build tasks for it. So like you can pull in NPM and gulp and grunt and all of these JavaScript task runners that I've probably named the wrong ones. I don't know. You can pull all of those in and then do loads of crazy optimizations and stuff. So I want to learn how all of that works. And the goal is to take one of my current static generated sites and rebuild it from the ground up and see what I can make. It may come out bigger than the current version. It may come out slower. It may come out better. I don't know. Just see what I can do. And then from that, because what I've noticed is some of the sort of mom and pop stores that come to me, so I'm a contractor, some of the mom and pop stores that come to me and say, hey, I want you to build me a website. All I want is a brochureware website. I could pull down .NET Core and build a whole MVC app and take up a whole server, or I could go the other route and get an Umbraco instance and do it that way, or I could grab a whatever. But that's just way too much server resource. If I could just spend 20 minutes pulling something together that looks and acts like a static site, there's no server-side costs, so it won't cost them anything, so I can drop the price down and be super competitive,
So was that project your low-level goal? Because you talked about the goals being not that good, and then you went in, and that example, that's a huge thing, and especially because I think a lot of the static site generators you talked about there work in very different ways as well. So some of them go off and they actually, like Hugo is an interpretation of the Go language. You've got Jekyll, which I think is it Java, and it's based around templates. I know that we've talked about JBake several times on here, which is another Java platform, and you can write your templates in sort of 5 or 6 different languages. It's definitely a huge thing, a huge undertaking, that.
And Gatsby is based on, well, it's more or less based on Create React App as well, which is based on Webpack, which is, I mean, all these things have all had many years worth of development put in them, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to do it in a year. You're going to do it better.
Well, he's a .NET dev, so he'll have it done in 2 hours.
Well, this is the thing, right? There are C# and .NET based static site generators, so it's just pick one and learn how it works.
Yeah.
And like we alluded to earlier on, we kind of alluded to, we didn't say it. One thing is implemented in one way, and a different thing is implemented in a different technology, but in a very similar way. I talked about WordPress and Umbraco and CMSs. They're all kind of solving the same problem, but they do them in slightly subtly different ways. If I can understand how a CMS works, then maybe I can understand how a static site generator works.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Cool.
Jamie, the amount of the breadth of knowledge that I know you have from all the different things that you've dipped your toe into. If I'm betting on anyone to be able to make one of those things better, it's definitely you. All I'm saying is maybe it's not a year worth of goal, right? It's but I mean, give yourself a bit more time, and yeah, you can definitely make some inroads in that based on what I know that you've been studying.
No, thank you very much. I mean, I'm not going to hold myself to it has to be done in a year, but within the next by what are we, March 2020? By March 2021, I want to be able to make a start on that. Maybe have a console app that I can just run and it just generates all the files for me. Even if that's just it pulls in these libraries and those libraries do some magic for me, and then my code takes over, because then I can slowly replace those magic bits, right? Because that's what dependency injection is all about, right?
Sure. Be a bit like the templating engine that used to exist in .NET framework. I don't know if it exists in Core, where you would give it a database and it would go and read the database and generate an MVC website for you for doing all the CRUD. And it was never production ready, but it was all right if you just wanted to put things in and out of the database and you didn't want to write the SQL yourself. So, Zach, have you got any goals and targets? Anything that you want to achieve apart from maybe growing a different shaped beard and mustache this year?
That's not a year's worth of goal. I generally do that every couple of months.
All right, don't make me feel less of a man. Come on.
It's really hard for me to have a consistent avatar photo. It's I never look the way that I actually do in real life. I mean, technical sort of things. I've sort of got myself to the point now where with technical sort of things, they're just ticking along. You know what I mean? Like I'm always hungry for more knowledge. I'm always looking for new things to do. But a lot of the stuff that I'm learning is either okay. Let me use real words. I'm learning Svelte and Istio are the two big pieces of tech that I'm wanting to learn in the immediate future for my work. And that's because they've got applications in the things that I'm actually doing. So the application that I build at Kudu, the team builds at Kudu, I should say, is a node-based microservices system that we've built up, and it's all living in Kubernetes and all the rest of it, all the trimmings, if you will. And we've now gotten it to the point where it is a solid system with a lot of really good features, but there is a number of things that we want to be able to shore up. There's some things that we would like to be able to monitor, and I don't want this to sound like the system is shoddy, right? This is the best system, the most like state of the art system that I've ever worked on in my whole career. Like we know things that none of my previous employers would ever be able to tell. We've got all sorts of metrics and all that kind of stuff, but we just want, now we're here, we want more, right? And so in terms of learning Istio, that's going to help us to be able to get that more. And you basically get a lot of out of the box. And to explain that tech, essentially Istio is well, not essentially, it is actually a service mesh. I'm not sure if that's I'm still unsure of whether that's a pattern or but anyway, you say service mesh and people kind of know what you mean. But it's a way for you to be able to have a whole heap of services just kind of get thrown into an environment and sort of know about each other in the way that they need to know about each other. And in providing the ability for them to be able to know each other. So that whole thing that I've just described there is called service discovery. And in supplying service discovery, you also get the opportunity to be able to inject all sorts of monitoring and traffic management and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to learn about that sort of stuff. And so that's more of a work thing. Outside of work, as I say, it's just sort of, I use my side projects to attempt to learn things that I wouldn't otherwise learn in my day to day. So I've built things that have GraphQL and Apollo in them, and different technologies that I don't use day to day to try and get out of my comfort zone. In terms of so as I say, all that sort of stuff is just ticking along. It's like next thing, next thing, next thing. Okay, yeah, great, I've learned that, and that's helping me out. So the things that I try and make goals around are more the soft skill things, and people who know me in real life know that I speak my mind to a fault sometimes, and I don't like people thinking that about me. I want people around me to be happy, and I want to be able to have fulfilling work relationships where we all get to go home happy with the work that we're doing and happy with the work that the people that we're doing them with. So this year I'm just spending time trying to be more mindful of how I approach conversations, and mindful of how the tech that I propose in the business, how that translates to how the business actually operates. Just all those sorts of things that developers might not think about. Do you know what I mean? Like, most of the time we've got our head down in the trenches. We're trying to make the best software that we can. And I'm still trying to do that, but I kind of want to get my head around the human element of it. I want to get my head around the business element of it, which is, I guess, also an element of being human. How do you sell things? I want to know all that. So that's what I'm focusing on this year.
Sure. Yeah, and for myself, similar to you, I'm picking up Svelte. I've done Knockout, I've done Angular, I've recently done Vue, and I really like Vue. I've played around with React, and I know we did a show on JavaScript frameworks, and we talked about the fact that once you know one of them, or you can turn your hand very quickly to a lot of the others because there are similarities between them. And I was going to pick up React this year, but I've swapped that out to Svelte. I think that when I went and read the documentation and that, it looks very much, or lends itself more to the old school vanilla JavaScript type of development work that I'm probably used to from the distant past, and I quite like that. And it borrows from some of the other languages, and I'm enjoying it. If you follow all of us on Twitter, you may have seen some tweets about myself and Zack actually talking about my struggles with it, and the fact that it's not Svelte that I was actually struggling with. It was the fact that I was struggling with the UI framework that I'd picked to use, because it just wasn't up to standard, or to the standard that I needed it. I don't want to speak too critically about it, because it does things very well, and it will get there. I'm sure it will, but it's just not fulfilling the need that I've got. So I spent far too long fighting with that to then go, actually, I'll just build my own components and get it done and get stuff done, because it's all well and good going out and doing tutorials and that to learn this framework or this new technology, but you only learn it for that piece. You go make a Hello World app or a to-do list, and you know how to make a to-do list. Whereas I'm building a big system with this. So I'm coming up with real world problems as I'm trying to do stuff. I'm like, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? And yeah, I could have gone and built this application in MVC, and I probably would have had this built end to end in maybe 2 or 3 nights, but I wouldn't have learned anything from that. So I want to do it so that I learn something new. All the back end stuff I'd built over a week or so, and that's all ticking along quite well. I've picked up Postgres as well, but I'm probably using that wrong because I'm using it like SQL Server, and that's probably a bad thing to do. I talked about F#, but that's been pushed out, and then hopefully, due to work requirements, I'm going to pick up some Azure stuff as well. Learn more about how you actually do that. Maybe go and do some of the accreditations through there. Soft skills wise, something that I do need to pick up this year is managing other people's BS. So something that I really find hard to tolerate is stupid people. And stupid people, it's probably a harsh word, but people that are causing problems, say in the workplace or in your personal life, for nothing more than just being argumentative. Now, a lot of the times I can turn around and go, oh, it is what it is. But now and again, something really gets on my back, and it stresses me out to the point where I'm thinking about it constantly. I'm taking that stress home and not sleeping because the arguments and the discussions I'm having with these people are going round and round in my head. And I just need to go, stop fretting about it. There's nothing you can do about it. It's not your issue. You're doing the best that you're doing. And it was one of the big things that I became a contractor to try and get away from, was the politics of the workplace. So I could just go, not my problem. I'm here to do a job, and just walk away from it. But whether it's because I've got too much professional pride, or I'm too involved in it, or I'm just an idiot, but I always get involved in it. I'm too passionate about it, maybe, and that's something I need to learn to take a step back, sort of. So that's a bit of a soft skills thing. Now, there's a lot of things going on there, and I am well known for taking on too much and doing too much. So, like, for the past 2 weeks, I've maybe got 3 or 4 hours sleep every night because I've been up till God knows when, in the morning, picking all these new technologies up and working on them and stuff like that. I've talked about it before. I don't typically sleep too much, so it's not too bad. But I'll get to a certain point and I'll crash out. I might get a solid 6 hours sleep one night. Something to look forward to. But what I don't want to sort of push forward on this podcast is that really that you should be out there learning new tech all the time. What are your guys' thoughts on not learning new stuff, not picking up goals? Does it make you a bad developer?
I don't think it does. I think you touched on it earlier on, James. You said something about I call it deliberate practice, but you called it
purposeful practice.
That's it, yeah, purposeful practice. It's you can go out and you can learn the latest technology, but you have to have a reason for learning it, because otherwise it's going to be like, oh, that's how I write Hello World. Brilliant, that's that knowledge gone. And you were saying, yeah, I'm building this UI for one of my projects in Svelte because I want to learn how to use Svelte. Well, that feels like it's a great application of that. You've set yourself a challenge of, this is the user interface I want to build, and this is the interactivity I want to build. How do I do that with this language or framework or tool, right? And I think that's in my opinion, a better way to do let's learn a new technology rather than just let's learn a new technology for the sake of learning a new technology. Because you don't really, in my opinion, again, I feel like you don't take it in and you don't actually learn anything, and you just spend hours reading documentation and throwing together a throwaway app, and then you throw it away and never come back to it. And you never absorb that knowledge, you never do the reflection on your current knowledge to be able to find out, oh, that's how this is done and that's how that's done. If you were going to do Angular versus React, you'd need to learn one of them to be able to compare it to the other. But then you can sit there and read the documentation, or you can build an app in Angular and then build the same app in React, because then those are the pain points that you're going to hit. So I can't do this in Angular very easily. I have to pull in 4 or 5 different libraries, but maybe React does it for me, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't know. And I think that's just learning something because everyone else is learning something and you're never going to use it. I wouldn't say it's a waste of time. It's just you could be doing something that gives you something back. you could sit and learn low level C and write a hello world in low level C. But then, unless you're doing something in low level C or planning to do something in low level C, you're never going to use that knowledge. Even to reflect on, you're never going to use it. So maybe learning the newest thing just because you want to learn the newest thing, or just because there is a new thing to learn, is sometimes maybe not the best idea.
Yeah, and the sort of the method you described there is how I pick stuff up. So people always sort of like roll their eyes at me when I say, "Oh, I'm going to pick this up and learn this," because I'll sort of go away and within a couple of days I'll come back and go, "I've built this with it," and they're like, "How?" And I'm like, "Well, because I skim read the documentation." I got an idea for what's going on, and then I went, right, let's build something and see how it hangs together. Now, granted, I probably spend more time banging my head against the wall to do something because I haven't read all the documentation back to front, upside down, and inside out. But I get an outcome. I get a product at the end of it. And yeah, I don't know it all, but I know enough to be dangerous with it. And I think that that's that's an essential skill to have, to have that awareness of these technologies and how they work. So I've had a couple of instances quite recently where somebody has said to me, "Oh, do you know, or have you built anything with this?" And I go, "No, I haven't, but I can tell you how it works. I understand the principles behind it because I've had a little bit of a play with it. I've spoken to some people about it, and I know how it hangs together, or how it theoretically hangs together." And they go, "Oh, right, okay, yeah, now that makes more sense because I've explained it in maybe more layman's terms." And then they've gone away and played with it, and they come back to me and go, "Oh, this is how you build it." So we've all done like little bits of it, and collectively, we've learned how to use something. But that's not for everybody. We all learn in very different ways, I think. And to my detriment, probably, I'm not as effective in some technologies as I probably could be if I'd read all the documentation.
So I want to start with, I'm not saying you're wrong.
But
Right?
yeah.
But and I think what you're talking about is a very effective, well, it's a well documented effective way of learning things, right? Like they talk about, you learn just enough to be able to do something, and then you do it, and that's how you accelerate your learning. And then you go back and do a little bit of reading, you do something different, and I mean that's a well documented good way of learning things fast. I've been able to, over the last sort of week or so, through talking to you, James, on Slack, I've been able to see a different, a different viewpoint on that than I've been able to see before. Because I've done a similar thing as what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Just exactly the sort of way that you've described how to do things. But what I haven't seen yet is watching someone else do that in a technology and in a paradigm that I'm very comfortable in. And so, what I'm talking about in conversations here. So let me, for your listeners, James has been learning some front end JavaScript stuff. He's obviously already a very accomplished designer, but has spent time in C# and all that kind of stuff. And so JavaScript is a newer venture for him in terms of the deeper stuff to do with Svelte and so forth. And so we've been in conversation, talking about the different things. How do I make this work? How do I make that work? Sort of thing. And what I've been noticing is that it's been kind of, oh, I can do this thing in C#. Why can't I do it in JavaScript? You know what I mean? Like, how do I do this thing that I can do in this other paradigm in this other paradigm? And so I think skim reading the documentation and then just trying to do something with it, what it misses out on is the subtleties of the thing that you're trying to learn. It unless you spend time trying to immerse yourself in the thing that you're trying to learn, then you miss, inevitably you're just going to try and do the same things the way that you've always done them, rather than trying to embrace what's cool about that new thing and what makes it cool. So when I went to learn Svelte, there was a 12-hour course on Udemy. It was excellently put together. Maximilian, oh god, I can't remember his last name. He does a lot of JavaScript stuff on Udemy. Go to Udemy, search Maximilian. You'll see the ones I'm talking about. He's done like a TypeScript course and Svelte and all that. It was 12 hours. I put it on 2 times speed so I could get through it in 6 hours. But he really like submerged me in this is Svelte and this is how you do things in Svelte and this is why it's cool and these are the things that you shouldn't do and all that kind of stuff. And it meant that I wasn't trying to make Svelte React. I wasn't trying to pass functions down to subcomponents like I do in React. Instead, I'm raising events back up the component chain because that's what Svelte does. Do you know what I mean? So I think that. So again, I'm not calling you. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that there's pros and cons to either side, right?
Yeah. I definitely see where you're coming from with that because I've done a lot of other frameworks and had eventing, and we had a conversation about the way that I was trying to get Schvelt's eventing to work, and it doesn't work in that way. It's still called eventing, but it works in a slightly different way. And it took me probably a few hours to get what I wanted to actually work. Whereas if I'd maybe done that course, then I would have been better. And I'll probably pick up that link off you and go and do that, because 12 hours down into 6 hours, that's a normal evening's worth of dev for me. So I'll probably do it in a night. so that'd be good. So yeah, it's definitely something to go and look at.
I think the important thing there is what Zac said something, and in my head I heard when the only thing you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you're coming from one technology where everything is a nail, then you're going to come along and say, "Oh, I've got this saw. How do I bash the nail in with the saw?"
Yeah. Yeah, we'd had conversations as well about separation of concerns and not duplicating your code and all that sort of stuff, and how that some of those principles are nice to have, but it's not necessarily the way that you do it in this technology or that technology. So there are definitely mindset shifts. I know when I was picking up Vue and I showed one of the JavaScript devs I was working with at the time what I was doing, and he looked through the code and he went, "You can tell that this is written by a .NET developer, because the way I'd named things and the way I'd laid everything out and spaced it all and how I'd broken it down into smaller components, which is a good practice, I think, regardless." But he was like, if it, generally JavaScript, we would have just done it all in that one, because then that little module does everything you need. You don't need to bring in all these other things. But I like to keep everything really concise, and I try and stick to that maximum of like 100 lines. But most things are like 20 lines and all that sort of. It's nice stuff, but often stuff that gets in the way when you're trying to learn something.
But see, the thing is, though, is that like even in what your friend is saying, that's still only relevant every now and again. You know what I mean? Like atomic design is exactly what you're describing. Mm-hmm. Like break things as small as possible. You're talking about atoms are buttons. You know what I mean? Like the HTML buttons.
Yeah.
So there are ways in order to be able to build that, and I think that what people, what developers get hung up on. They get hung up on their principles sometimes. What they don't realize is that when they obviously do realize it. I'm generalizing what they are perhaps not seeing when they make arguments about, or at least be dogmatic about their principles, is that principles aren't an absolute. Not every principle fits every single situation, and principles aren't about picking the best principles. It's about making the best trade-offs. And so every single principle you make, you dry, right? When you dry things up, you are inevitably coupling anything that uses the thing that you've just dried up. It's a classic trade-off. Yeah, I don't have to write it twice, but now everything's coupled, and that's my trade-off. You know, and if that's worth it, then great. But it doesn't. You can't just. There is no one size fits all principle. There isn't.
Yeah, and I've been a victim of that with the. So I've implemented a repository. It's not a repository pattern as such, but I've just called it a repository, which is where I go off and I do all my API calls to get all the data for the front end. Now, I've had that working 6 or 7 times and then looked at it and gone, that could be better. That could be better. That could be smaller. That could be more concise. And I've probably, I almost swore then, wasted 3 nights, 3 nights. And as I said, I probably sit here for 7 or 8 hours of an evening when I get the chance. And I have been up till like 2 o'clock in the morning for those 3 nights and sat down at about 7:30 of an evening when the kids have gone to bed. You do the maths. Over 3 nights, just rewriting those probably 60 lines of code until they're concise enough that I'm happy with it. And what I'm actually trying to do is build a system that solves a problem for me. And am I any closer to it solving that problem for me? No. Is what I've got now the same solution to what I had before? Yes. Did it solve a problem and an issue with the website? Yeah. So the system wouldn't load my data out the APIs when I refresh the page, but everything else worked. And I've spent 3 nights trying to fix a refresh issue, whereas I could have come back to that later on and fixed it. I could have just moved forward. So yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Does this? It's been a while since I've been on the Cynical Developer. Do you now put like a PSA at the start that you should not try and be like me?
Yeah.
I feel like that needs like a health warning. Don't aspire to be like James. 3 hours a night, man. Go to sleep. Go to bed.
Do what?
I'm speaking on behalf of Mrs. Studdard, your mother. Go to bed. It's time for bed now, James.
Well, my mother, I don't live with, and my wife works nights, so I put the kids to bed, and then I'm sat here then. And she works quite a lot of nights, so she actually leaves at probably 6:45. 45 minutes later, kids are in bed, and once they're asleep, they're generally asleep. I then get into bed about 1-2 o'clock, and then they wake me up about 4 or 5. So yeah, it's fantastic. Living the dream is what I'm doing.
I think you raised a good point there, though, James. Like, why? What have you gotten out of it? You've had 3 evenings of stress for no real reason, right? And I think Zach made the really good point there about principles, right? They are principles, and they are a great sort of thing to try and apply if they fit with the problem you're solving. But if what you're making, from the sounds of it, it's starting out as an MVP, just get the blooming thing working.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter about how good the code is right now, as long as it's working, right?
Yeah.
And if it is an MVP or it is a throwaway project, just get it working. Don't waste time building factories for your factories to create builders for your objects. Just hard code the object or hard code that dependency, because you can swap it out later. I know people who have spent days and days and days building interfaces and dependency injection for their database technology. And then they've come to me and said, that's wonderful, that's never going to change. It's brilliant. I'll go, okay, rewind a few words, right? You use dependency injection for something that is never going to change. And you spent days doing it. Why?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's good practice. Well, yeah, okay, it is good practice. But you're never going to change it. And we need it out the door tomorrow. You just wasted 3 days doing something that you didn't have to do.
But we know as developers, as soon as you say that it's never gonna happen, it happens.
Oh, most definitely, yeah.
You build your software in such a way then that when the eventuality happens that it is needed, then it's not all that difficult to throw in. You know what I mean? Like you cut the corners in such a way that you're able to stick them back on easily enough. And I think that what Jamie makes is a really good point, but yet another point about staying up so late and all that kind of stuff. There was a developer that I respect the heck out of that I used to work with. His name's Paul McNamara. He's not. I just said his name because I feel like he needs the credit, but it's not like he makes Pluralsight courses or anything like that. But he said to me, he made a comment one time that I'm sure he probably doesn't even remember saying, but it stuck with me. Was you said, after 10 p.m. You stop writing software and you just start writing bugs. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's just all bugs after 10 p.m. all the way as far as the eye can see. You know.
Yeah. The irony of it is the fact that when it comes to client work, I do exactly what Jamie said. I do what is needed to get out the door. As soon as it comes to my own projects, I spend so much time polishing the nuts and bolts. I don't realize that the rest of the car I've built is awful until maybe it's too late.
Is that not though? Because presumably with your clients, there's a time limit. I got to get this work done before tomorrow. I got to get
Yeah.
this work done before next week. Because if I don't, then the project will slip, and that's my deadline, and I no longer have a client, right? Whereas we said earlier on about you set yourself a lofty goal or too small of a goal. Perhaps you're setting yourself this goal of I want to build this UI for this thing, or I want to build this API, but you never set it needs to be done by this date,
Yeah.
because it's not something that
Mm-hmm.
right now you're not trying to sell, you're not trying to create as a product.
Yeah.
It's just this is a thing that will eventually sort of um, drift towards a completed product. And I know from my experience, when I've had a project like that and it just sort of slowly drift towards something, it never gets there. I set myself the goal in 2014, I think, of making an HTML5 video game, and I have a canvas and I have two characters, and one chases the other. Doesn't tell you why they're chasing the other. Doesn't tell you why the player character gets slower, and it doesn't tell you why the enemy character speeds up and then suddenly stops. It's just it never got any further than that, because it was just that experimentation phase. I did want to get it to be in 3D, but I'll never get there because the goal is too lofty. It's too woolly. There's no real requirements there.
Sure.
And maybe that's what's happened here, because your client work is very well defined. You need to get this done, then this done, then this done, and it needs to be done by then. Whereas your own personal work is very, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. If I spend 2 days rewriting it, then it's fine because there's no real pressure.
Yeah, and it is exactly that, because I do tend to set myself targets. Like normally when I build a system like this, even for a personal project, I set up a Trello board, I set deadlines, and I'll write down on a whiteboard. I have these totally arbitrary delivery dates and go, right, that's going to be delivered by then, that's going to be delivered by then. I have the tickets, I move them across, I understand, right, that's what I do, and I've done that to a point with this, but I haven't done enough of it, and I haven't done any mock-ups for the UI, so I'm sort of making it up as I go along. So a little bit more structure would make that better. This has definitely turned into a James is a terrible developer episode rather than talking about goals.
But I mean, I think the thing is, I think this still defines goals, though, right? Because the thing is that I don't think it's even necessarily just the fact that they're different pieces of work. I think that they're different ways of thinking in terms of with your. So the reason why you've got drive in order to be able to make the correct decisions in order to be able to do your client work is because your client wants to be able to do. They've got a grander vision. They've got things that they want to be able to achieve. And with your own side projects, they're their own goal. They're their own thing. They're like there is no grander vision. It just is like this is the thing that you're trying to build, and so you have less. Well, you don't have the incentive in order to be able to make your deadlines real. The reason why the deadlines are real for the grander business side of things is because if I don't meet this deadline, then this other thing falls apart, and this other thing falls apart, and then all of a sudden there's no more business left anymore, and my grand visions are never realized. You don't have that with a side project. You miss your first deadline, and well, you just push it out by another week, sort of thing. And there's a quote by Leonard Bernstein where he says, "In order to be able to achieve great things, you need two things: a plan and not quite enough time." And there's that is a thing. So maybe a cool experiment for a side project, which I'm just thinking of now, but I might actually try and do, is set yourself a project with completely unrealistic deadlines and just see what happens.
Yeah.
You know, and make your deadline stick. So if you say, oh well, I've got until the 30th of whenever to get the front end done, and then it gets to the 30th of whenever and I've got X amount of the front end done, well, that's what we're shipping.
Yeah.
Like that's as far as I got. So now I'm going to move on to the next part, and then at the end, just see what the project looks like. Because the thing is if you set it on a long enough timeline, I'm not going to want to waste that time. If I set the project like a 3-month project or whatever, I'm going to want to see something at the end of 3 months, or else I'm going to feel like I've wasted all that time.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so if I get to the end of the first month milestone and I don't really have what I'm going to deliver, then geez, I better make those second 2 months worth it.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can take something from that, because I've spoken to people who are the type of users that will want my system. And some of them are quite high profile people in certain industries, certain hobbies that want this product. So maybe what I should do is say to them, yeah, I am building this and I will have something for you to see by this date. And then go, right, what can I actually deliver by that date for them to see?
Yeah, why not, right?
Yeah.
I've toyed with one of the things that I keep coming back to and then being distracted from and keep coming back to is I want to make a Mega Drive game in C. Like, use the actual dev tools that Sega created, minus the dev hardware, because that's going to be prohibitively expensive, and create an actual game that I can burn onto a cartridge and play on a real Mega Drive, right? Problem with that is it's all woolly defined. I've got an idea of what I want the game to be, but I don't know when it's going to be made by, because I still need to source all of the tools.
Yeah.
I'm currently using some open source stuff that's created by someone else to get me started. And then when I finally source the actual tools and the actual hardware, I'll swap over, because the code will migrate, just the process will change. But I don't have that at all. Whereas if I decided, right, okay, I'm going to make something with my, the company that I run, essentially, because I'm a contractor, the company that I run is going to make something and sell it, and I start marketing it now for release in whatever time. Like Zach was saying, like you just said, I've set myself that goal. I need to have something, a minimum viable product. Maybe the UI is just one button and it just says, okay, and that's it. There is something there,
Yeah.
Whereas if I don't set that goal, there's never going to be anything there, right?
Yeah. I think the biggest blocker you've got on that project is that you need to also build a time machine so you can go back 25 years and then sell it and make you millions.
No, there
Don't
is
be
a
silly.
huge...
There's
Yeah,
retro
first of all.
gamers out there. I mean, the Jamie, all you need to do is tell gamers a release date. Like, tell actual gamers that are interested in the sort of game that you're going to play a release date, and then you will have the motivation to build the game. Because you either deliver a game on that release date, or you watch your inbox fill with "I hope you die" emails.
I have the fact of putting it up on Kickstarter, just like, if you want to help me make this game, because I've seen there's games like Tanglewood and Xenocrisis, which are new games for Mega Drive hardware that were part funded on Kickstarter and that delivered because they had all of these people saying, "Where's my game? Where's my game?" And you don't even have to ship them a real cartridge. You just send them a 12 kilobyte ROM file and it will just run in an emulator. And you go, "Here's my game. What do you think?"
How are you going to send 12 kilobytes? Man,
12 kilobytes.
You're going to ship it to them on a disc? How are you going to get it there? That's not going to
Five
go.
and a half inch floppy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say one floppy disk in the post.
Have you been talking to my wife? What? We shouldn't be talking about things like that on this podcast.
You should probably edit that out.
Yeah, maybe. So we talked about deadlines and that there. Now, if you don't meet those deadlines, what about issues with that? Like beating yourself up because you haven't done it, because you haven't reached your goal, or maybe you haven't learned something in the last 12 months. What's your stance on that?
Well, I like the idea that Zach gave earlier on of you set yourself this goal and then you work towards it and have something, because then you can apply a retrospective or a post-mortem or whatever you want to call it, where you can look back on, here's what went really well, here's what didn't go really well, and here's how I can improve for next time. Because again, like Zach said earlier on, learning about how you learn is one of the most important skills to have, and to have in a very malleable way, in a very probably malleable is the wrong word, in a very practiced way, is to learn how you learn. I'm not going to say how I learn, because we'll get Paul from coach.co.uk leaving a nasty comment. but 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 just knowing how you learn, and knowing that, okay, maybe 3 months was not enough time, maybe 3 months was too much time, and I spent more time sitting watching Netflix, because all I did was I set myself the 3 month goal of writing Hello World in C# or in Svelte or whatever, right? That's way too much time. But how do you know that's too much time? You have to go and do it, right? And being able to have those milestones, those parts along the way, is why we have in Agile and Scrum and all these businessy ways of building software. Let's stop and look back at how we've done and see what we can do for getting the next bit done. Have that there, but be honest with yourself and say, look, I know as you're getting towards that deadline, say, I know I'm not going to make it. So like Zach said, I'm going to get to the deadline and stop and see what I've got, and then look back. I feel like all I'm doing is just echoing what Zach said.
It's not. I mean, it's not a bad thing to do, in my experience.
True, yeah.
Even if he does say so himself. So, as I said right near the beginning, this episode's a little bit different from the normal type of show that we do, and the way we've delivered it is slightly different, and hopefully the way that I've come across is slightly different as well. I try to be a little bit more measured for the cynical developer. Now, I do have a laugh and a joke, and make the odd comment here and there. But one thing that I will let you in on is the fact that the three of us have started a new podcast as well. It's very much a lot more lighthearted. It's very much the three of us sat around a table in a pub or a bar and having a chat about developer things. And it's quite funny, if we do say so ourselves. We've got a few audiograms out, and we've just edited the latest episode, and that's got sent out to us. And I was sat in the office yesterday, I think it was, at the time of recording this, listening to it, laughing to myself about things I've said, about the things that the Zack and Jamie had said as well, and I thought it was quite entertaining, and very egotistical all at the same time. But if you like what we've got to say, if you don't like what we've got to say, and you want to get really irate and listen to more of our opinions, then definitely head over and listen to the podcast. And it's sort of the other end of the stick to the cynical developer, because this is don't be cynical, use everything. So the title of it is Tabs and Spaces, and you can find that at tabsandspaces.io, and it's on all your same podcatchers of choice. We're on Twitter at Tabs and Spaces as well, Tabs and Spaces HQ. So I'll include some links in there, and Zack is our front man for Tabs and Spaces. He's the face of the podcast, and by face I mean he runs the Twitter account, and sort of rules over myself and Jamie. So
with an iron fist.
Yeah. So if you do reach out to us, then it will probably be him that you deal with. So apologies for that in advance.
I've been listening back to our own podcast in terms of the first couple of episodes that we've put together, and what I really like about it is that I think it's really hit the nail on the head of what we set out to achieve, which is essentially not necessarily advice, not necessarily instructional, but it's unfiltered views from developers in the industry about developer related things, about things that you might worry about things that you might be concerned about. And we've already had people coming coming forward to us through the email, through the Twitter, and so forth, and telling us that I so relate to that, and I'm so glad that I'm not the only one out there feeling that way. And I think it's good to be able to broadcast those sorts of things to make sure that people know that we're all in this together, sort of thing.
Yeah, we're all Twitter bots. We're all human. Is what I meant. Well, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to that, Jamie. Any examples or any practical tips about building wheels or anything
So
like that?
what I'd say is go download the podcast, and you can hear me talking about all my examples.
Yeah, definitely.
We should have the examples podcast, right?
maybe we could do
that.
that. We could do that on Patreon, maybe.
Yeah, bonus episodes. Get Jamie to do all of his examples all in one go.
Yeah. We just stop it and go, there were 17 examples for this. If you wish to hear the other 14, then head over to our Patreon account.
Yeah, that's it. Or you can do like a Patreon, what is it? They just submit ideas and I come up with examples that link them all together.
Nice. The tedious examples, tedious link examples.
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. So we're out of time for today's episode. Hopefully the listeners have got something from this. Maybe it's that they need to go and set themselves some goals and try and achieve something. And the fact that just because you fail at your goal, it's not a bad thing. And just because you trip and you fall and on the way to achieving that goal, that's not a bad thing either. And just get out there and have a play and learn something. Or if you've got no need to learn anything, you're quite happy with where you are and what you're doing, and you don't want to learn anything, by all means do that. But I think if you're listening to a tech podcast, you're not of that mindset, you're not of that personality. So I would definitely say reach out to us and let us know what your goals are for 2020, and if you're experiencing some of the things that we've talked about. And as I've just said, head over to tabsandspaces.io and definitely subscribe to the other podcast, where you can hear us all slander each other relentlessly for an hour or more. And as it's been pointed out, every episode seems to get longer and longer. So maybe by the time this comes out, there'll be a 14-hour episode out for you to enjoy. But
only 3 examples, right?
3 examples over that time. That'd be a miracle. I know we're good, but we're not miracle workers. But anyway, so thank you for listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Sludott, and you've been listening to the co-host of the Tabs and Spaces podcast, talking about what developers really want to achieve. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website, where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.